welcome to Wabash Center's Seasons of a Teaching Career. I am Lynne Westfield, Director of the Wabash Center. At the producer's desk is Carly Hollinsby, and Paul Myrie is our sound engineer. Seasons of a Teaching Career is a 3-part video resource exploring the issues of early career colleagues. We are particularly interested in wellness and wholeness of early career scholars. In this 3-part series, we are asking questions like, what is a thriving scholar? What is a healthy scholar? What is a flourishing scholar? My conversation partners for these episodes are first Dr. Leah Payne. Dr. Leah Payne is Associate Professor of American Religious History at Portland Seminary, George Fox University. Thank you, Leah, for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Our other conversation partner is Dr. Roger Naam. Dr. Roger Naam is Professor of Hebrew Bible, Candler School of Theology, Emory University. Welcome, Roger, to the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to talk about what we need to talk about for our early career colleagues, right? Because it feels like sometimes they don't have enough conversation about things that could facilitate their life and their life choices in scholarship. So that's what this whole series is about. We thought we'd start in this first conversation to talk about permissions, right? Are there certain permissions we could give our early career colleagues that would free them up? Because being a junior, being an upstart, being a person new to institutions, new to scholarship, new to these vocations, sometimes needs a mentor or a friend or a colleague to say, you might want to think about being about these things. The topic of permissions came up because I remember distinctly many years ago being a part of an early career workshop at Wabash. And being given permission. Now, nobody said you have permission to do this. Let's start saying that, excuse me. Nobody gave me permission, but I heard it as a permission that you should, in your second year of a 6-year arc of tenure, start thinking about the tenure process now. Get a tenure plan together, map your tenure, set your arc in those directions. They gave me permission to do that. My colleagues at my university were not neglectful by not doing that, right? So we're not saying people are not being attended to by giving people permission, but I heard their advice, their permission to get started now. Had they not said that at the Wabash workshop, I would have waited, I promise you, for my 4th or 5th year to start thinking about the process, which would have been too late. So we want to, in this 3-part series, do those kinds of advice, those kinds of maybe even tips, tricks, and techniques, I'm not sure, but just some common sense things that early career people need to be about. And we're starting with permissions. So Roger, help us, start us out. Let's continue this conversation about permissions. Why was this conversation interesting to you?
Well, that's a great framing, Lynn. And if you think about our PhD training, if being a professor meant writing a polished expository prose paper every semester for 6,000 words that is well documented, then we have no problem transitioning to early career professors. But of course, as we all know, the vocational life is so much more sophisticated than that. And it blindsides a lot of us. We are unaware until we're actually in it. So even the language of permissions, I think, would be foreign to most early career scholars, especially as they start out. Their expectations of what success is, it looks very different when you're actually in it in that first job.
Mm-hmm. Leah, come on in the conversation, because we decided together to start this conversation with permissions. Why did that resonate with you as well?
You know, I was thinking about that just this morning because I had read some sort of dire headline in the Chronicle for higher ed about getting jobs and what I think it was something like professors are leaving the biz at higher rates than ever before. And I was thinking about my own grad school experience. I was in grad school during the Great Recession. And it was just all doom and gloom. And you better be grateful if you are gainfully employed in any way in the academy in the future. And I think that there was that the question of, are you permitted to live fully into your identity as a professor, was like, if there's a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it was so far down on the list.
Mhm.
And so when I think about my own graduate school experience, and then the experience of students now who are in another financial crisis type situation and early career scholars, it can be hard to even make space for that when you're so worried about what seems like might seem like more important issues, but really like that the idea of developing a sense that you are permitted to live as a fully, you're entitled to be a scholar. That's a really important conversation too. But when you're in a season of uncertainty, you can kind of put that one on the back burner. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation right now.
I remember distinctly my first semester with a full-time faculty position, tenure track position. And one of my big obstacles in the first semester was finding my way around campus. Like, I think those of us who have been in this life for a long time forget about or don't, just lost touch with how difficult it is to onboard people and how long it takes to kind of get acculturated into the academy. And so I had a genuine concern about when I had committee meetings in the larger university, I would start early trying to find the room, right? So then things like, how do you go to committee meetings? How do you have a whole life? How do you see yourself and continue to relate to your senior colleagues, the other junior colleagues, seem like mystical things, right? So one of the best things I think we can help our colleagues too is to say you have to have agency for yourself in your own context. Mm-hmm. Right? You have to purpose yourself to say, I will be a whole human being, I will be a thriving human being, and not expect the institution to say that to you, to give you that permission. You have to give yourself that permission and then pursue those things, because it is a confusing time to be an early career scholar.
I'm really sorry. I apologize in advance, Lynn, but I'm going to one up on the getting lost story. So I'm new to Candler. Mm-hmm. And so because of COVID protocols, we're only allowed in classrooms for 90 minutes. And so for a 3-hour class, you switch classrooms after 90 minutes. So the middle of my first semester, because they want to, sanitize the classroom and have a new space, a new air. The middle of my very first semester last fall, I teach my first half. Then we moved to another classroom. I had been going to the wrong classroom for the first 10 weeks of the semester. And worse than that, I was kicking out other students who had reserved that room. Sorry, this is for classroom use. And so I had kicked out students who rightfully reserved that space as a safe space to study in order to lead my class into the wrong room, when I finally decided I should probably look at the classroom numbers. And it turned out I was going to the wrong classroom for the first 10 weeks.
So it is difficult during COVID to be a senior scholar, to be a former dean who speaks with great authority when they're kicking students out of the classroom.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Great authority.
But part of what we're talking about is the feeling of disorientation, right? So when you are disoriented, that doesn't mean that that's a mistake. That doesn't mean that is a shaming or blaming experience. Allow yourself to be disoriented, but then try to figure out how to reorient yourself, right? So those are difficult things to do, but possible to navigate.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, Roger, when you were saying that I've modeled so much of my own trying to speak with authority in the classroom, watching you do that. And so I was thinking, I would definitely, I'm not sure what I would do once I found that out, but I can't imagine doing that as, with much less of a sense of my own authority, because you belong in the teaching space. I want to know what Roger Naum of like 12 years ago would have done.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done. I think I would have tried to pass it as self-deprecating humor and try to balance it with, this is something that was actually very true when I started 12 years ago, there was a very tangible struggle for authority in my own field as I taught. When I started, and this was 2008, I was definitely on the younger side for the faculty. I'll tell you, I'll be honest, the first faculty, what do you call it, faculty retreat we do, the fall before, everybody, all my colleagues, my wonderful colleagues, they had two conversation topics that dominated the 3-day faculty retreat. One, grandchildren, their grandchildren. Number two, body aches and pains. That was all they wanted to talk about. And here I was with an infant and just in my 30s. And so there was a struggle for authority. And so when confronted like something like that, I think I would turn to self-deprecating humor, as long as it was balanced with my constant fight and kind of subtle fight that I actually know what I'm talking about in biblical texts in Hebrew. But I think I did that enough my opening years to allow for those things and to own them in a kind of a ha ha ha, sorry for those students, and to move on.
But the fact that you noticed that you were the younger person is important, right? And I don't mean that as a common sense thing, that we try to sometimes in our coping mechanisms just say, they hired me, so I am like them, or they hired me and I'm not like them. But rather than saying, in what ways am I like them? In what ways am I not like them? And how do I want to set my own trajectory, regardless of who they are? Who do I want to be?
Right.
Those are important questions to keep in front of us as early on in our careers as we possibly can.
It's so stark because you go from a graduate school where everybody's pretty young, all your peers are pretty young, professors are a different class, then you're thrust into this group where, oh my goodness, I don't have grandchildren and my body feels okay, so I can't engage in this conversation.
I was thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking that I sort of got used to inhabiting like a particular role for senior scholars that I had to kind of negotiate out of when I stepped into like early career life. And that role was definitely the daughter. Like I'm the daughter, I'm a pastor's kid, so I know all about being like, creating a space as a daughter. And I remember the first time I wrote something that was public, like I wrote a public piece that got a strong negative response. And including from some men who had been in like positions of authority in my life. And my spouse said to me, Leah, you are no one's daughter in this conversation. Like you need to like stop thinking about yourself like that. And that was a really important moment, kind of like a whoa, snap out of it. But I'd gotten so used to kind of creating like this pleasing role that as an early career scholar, it was a really big hurdle for me to say, like, I can't do that anymore. First off, it's not going to work forever, but like that role is ultimately doesn't let you be what you need to be as a scholar. I'd love to hear from you all about like what kinds of roles that you inhabited and like how do you adjust as an early career?
Yeah, I think the family metaphors are oftentimes so infantilizing. That they're dangerous, even if they're meant with the best of intentions or friendly or warm, right? No early career scholar is anybody's daughter or son or child, right? To be parented. So no, I don't like that at all. One of my challenges was I was the only junior for about 6 years. The year before I was tenured, they hired another person. So all of my colleagues had been there and established. So I was the only one. So I'm going to go against what I just said. I literally felt like an only child, but this is me using the metaphor, the only child of old parents. So nobody thought, that's why I said I wasn't neglected, but nobody thought that I needed anything because they hadn't mentored, which is a much healthier metaphor in action rather than parented, a younger scholar.
Right.
I think if I remember well, when I thought of myself, like how do I make sense out of what it is that I'm trying to do? I thought of myself as a pioneer almost, right? I thought of myself because I was alone, kind of forging this way. So I'm not saying that that's a metaphor for everybody, but there was a great sense of nobody is helping me do this. I have to figure most of these things out by myself.
Yeah, my response is I was also kind of a unique junior faculty member, but I was also the first ethnic minority in my seminary to be hired. And so the family metaphor takes a dark turn when that dynamic is there. And so I think one way that I cope with that is I actually made great friendships at different departments of people that were kind of closer to my age. And then in retrospect, I realized that came at a cost too. There was almost a feeling, it wasn't spoken, but I know there was a feeling of betrayal. How can you not be our best friend? You're like, why are you hanging out with the biologist? Like, but that was part of my own way to create networks that were more germane to the stage of life that I was at.
It also informed you, Roger, that people were watching what you did.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
There was expectation.
Yep.
It was never in the handbook that you could be friends, but not good friends with STEM professors. It was never in the handbook because I read the handbook.
That's where I think that's such a great example of how the family metaphor can really go sideways, because it's not like you're betraying, your family, you're developing collegial relationships, right? And I remember one of the first conversations that I had with someone who ended up becoming a really strong mentor said, you need to start thinking about collegiality. And I had never really thought of that as, I don't know why, I think I was just working all the time and trying to finish grad school. But I think that helped me so much because what in the world, like, why shouldn't you be friends with biologists? That's so silly. But if you do have like some sort of like, this is your family, then there's something that I've never really thought hard about how the number of ways that the family metaphor can hurt.
Yeah,
it's very dangerous. I think it's very dangerous. And particularly in a litigious society where there's all kinds of HR rules about, because right after, if I'm not your daughter, then the next thing is I'm your wife. Now we got a problem, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it is murky and shadowy and needs to be avoided. I do remember as a young scholar needing to network, but not knowing how, wanting to branch out. And the best way that I found was I maintained friendships and relationships with non-scholarship people who had professions other than ours.
Right.
And in retrospect, we tend to cut off relationships with other people who aren't scholars, right? So one of the things that kept me rooted, kept me grounded, was when my friends who were teachers said, high school, elementary school teachers, we teach all day. You don't even have a real job. You teach 2 classes a semester. Which kept my perspective. You can kind of get immersed in the academy and think the academy is not a world, but the world, right? And that, again, another red flag to say, no, you need worlds outside of the academy to keep you sane, to keep you whole, to keep you grounded.
I think it's healthy to have friends that just don't care that you have a PhD and always say that you're not the right kind of doctor. I think there's actually something healthy to have those people in your life.
I think that's true. I've recently, in these pandemic times, reconnected with a couple of high school friends, and they know me in a totally different way. And it's been such a relief, because I don't know about you all, but I've just been trapped here with my thoughts for a long time. And you can kind of spin out a little bit, and it's so grounding to have people who don't really care what AAR is and make you, explain yourself every time you use an obscure acronym or something like that. So I totally agree. That's so life-giving and just really healthy, especially when you're in the early career stage, because everything feels so intense and and it is so intense. It is so important. So it's helpful to have those kind of lifelines outside.
Well, and there's something about the rhythm and the timing of how we work as scholars that it feels like early on, it felt like I was working 50, 60 hours a week. even though my friends thought I was only teaching 2 classes a semester, right? The reality was I was overworking.
Yeah.
So to have people to give yourself permission, or to be given the common sense statement of, you need to have some friends who tell you it's not good to work 70 hours a week and call that scholarship, right? That's not good. Don't do that.
Right.
So this bit about permission giving, and helping people with their formation early on in scholarship, as well as the possible deformation that happens in some institutions where you are surveilled, you are neglected, you're not supposed to talk to people outside of your department because that will be betrayal, right? So part of this conversation is, so many of these climates are toxic to the formation of early career colleagues. So Roger, you have a video clip for us.
Yeah, I had some challenges in giving myself permission, and I want to, if I can, share with you a little bit of how I kind of navigate that. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take over the screen.
As an early career scholar, giving yourself permissions is so crucial to your own flourishing and thriving. And so I look back at my own early career era as a professor, and I think, why didn't I give myself permissions earlier? What took me so long to really exhibit my embodied agency as a professor? And I have a few thoughts on that as I reflect upon my own life. And the first reason is personality. Now, I just happen to be kind of a type of person who likes to please people for both healthy and unhealthy ways. And so I don't know whether it's birth order or whether it is something innate within me, but I just like to please people. And so that kind of goes against you in exhibiting agency and giving yourself permissions as an early career scholar. Another reason is culture. Now, I don't mean to essentialize Asian culture, but I will say, looking back in my early years, I have a little Mulan in me. This idea of responsibility, of being committed to the institution and to tradition and taking that place. Almost this filial piety towards the academy. And so I'm not even Chinese, but I think I could see some aspects of characteristics of the character Mulan that I embodied as an early career scholar. Another reason is my past school success. Now, I went through school with relative success, and you realize if you go to school in the Western world, you are rewarded for compliance. The best grades are the ones that really look at the professor's prompts, that really kind of even see the subtext of these assignments and give the professor or the teacher what they want. And in doing so, I had this many years of experience of compliance leading to academic success. And another reason is work experience. Working in the academy is actually my third job, and my previous jobs were not rewarding of agency and more rewarding of compliance. I did not have permissions, and that was just part of the culture. So I was a pastor for a huge denomination in a huge church with many, many pastors. And when I was a pastor, I was very young. So I was on the very bottom rung. I could not do anything without permissions from elders or other pastors. The second job is I was in high-tech industry, and working at a company is so much different than university shared governance. Everything goes to the board. The board is in charge of the CEO. The CEO is dedicated to the shareholder. And what your boss says you do, you are just compliant in that way. You don't really have permissions. And I kind of thought about what led me to shift in my own personality, in my own professional life as an early career scholar, to really take up the place of permissions. And there's one phrase that really helped me. One phrase that was so easy to remember. It's not original to me, but it really helped me catalyze my own agency to give myself permissions as an early career scholar. And that phrase was, say no so you can say yes. Say no so you can say yes. In other words, I was giving myself the permission to select and choose what would bring the benefit to my flourishing. For example, I knew that if I wanted to stay as a professor, I had to finish my first book. But I was teaching a 4-4, and I was one of 7 minoritized faculty out of 240 at this institution. And so I gave myself permission to say no to certain obligations in order to say yes to working on my book. And that included obligations within the school, but also within my own cultural communities. Also obligations of taking the courses. Oftentimes at institutions, it is the senior tenured faculty that get their first choice of courses to teach. There, at many institutions, is a sense of ownership of I own these courses, but you can have these. But I had to finish my first book. So I remember giving myself permission to contend for a schedule that isn't 4 new preps every semester, that I could fight for certain classes by which I had the greatest expertise because there was something greater. Another thing was just for myself, I have great joy and passion in mentoring. And by saying no to certain obligations, it would allow me to say yes to mentoring of students, of potential PhD students, and now to early career scholars, and helping them out and walking alongside these other things. And that's something really, really important to me. And by saying no to certain things, I could say yes to that aspect of mentoring. So remember, early career scholars, say no to say yes. Give yourself that permission.
So no is a complete sentence.
No.
No does not need no, and let me tell you all the excuses about why I can't do dean, academic dean, president, colleague, what you're asking me to do. You don't have to explain yourself. Now, I know there are different cultures, different institutions, but for us to truly be grounded, truly flourish, truly seek a trajectory of thriving for the long haul in scholarship. And I'm just echoing back, Roger, what you said. You can't say yes to everything you're asked to do because they will kill you. they all these requests. I remember as a junior being asked over and over and over to do something, right? And I went to a senior colleague and said, because I kept saying no. I said, what is up with these people? I can barely find my way across campus, right? Literally. And I keep being asked to do other things. His advice was, do one thing so they'll stop asking you. And then you can say, I don't have to do anything else. I was suspect of that advice. I agreed to do one thing, like the next thing I was asked to do, and they left me alone after that.
It's funny that you mentioned that because the first story that came to mind, first memory that came to mind was my first year as a full-time faculty member being asked to do tons of stuff. And usually it was framed in such a way, at least in my experience, we'd love to have a woman's voice involved. And so then we're going to ask you to be on whatever committee. And I remember it was like the third or fourth one. It was the library committee at my university. And I remember thinking, I need to find a way to say yes to this. And I emailed an important mentor and said, what should I do? And that mentor said, absolutely not. Stop. And so then I sent a draft of the email, of my declining email, to that mentor. And they said, take out 3 of these exclamation points. You don't need to sound that friendly. Which I thought was, to your point about, you don't have people in explanation, but I was so anxious about it, right? You just feel like you have to say yes to everything. So yes, any early career scholar, I love the advice of say yes to one thing, because then that's the thing that you trot out to say, oh, look, I already said yes to this.
Well, and if you're trying to get promoted, you're trying to be conscientious, you're trying to get the book out, you're trying to get the article out, you are already fulfilling a complete portfolio without all these tack-ons, add-ons, oh, you can do it. So a compromising addition to this conversation is, and this is, Leah, what you were talking about, if you become the token woman, if you become the token person of color, the token African-American, the token Latinx colleague, so then they want you to, we call it black tax. We need a black person on everything that happens, and you become it. Then you are taxed for the culture or the race that you bring that's been minoritized in the country or in that institution. You can't be the representative Black voice on every committee or task force that people dream up.
Yeah, and in this type of situation, my emphasis to the early career scholar is the faculty handbook is your friend. And so it is a legal document. They clearly outline the service obligations. And I would assume 90% of the early career listeners who are women or ethnic minorities, you are overshooting the service obligation right now. I would bet 90%. And you have legal grounds. Who have they tenured in the past? What is the service that they do? And I would bet that you are way overshooting that. So the faculty handbook does provide some protection. I will also say there's an unwritten rule of obligation, and that's something, it's institution to institution. It involves reading your institution. What is the political cost of you saying no to this library committee? But at the minimum, you need to think about that. And that's something that I didn't do early in my career. I just wanted to be that good citizen, and I felt the pressure. But looking back, I way overshot my service commitment. And as I think as a, as someone senior, I want my early career scholars to thrive at my institution. I want them to be freed up because this is the crucial time when they develop their identity as a scholar. And so for those hearing and kind of feeling the frustration, minimally think about the faculty handbook. I would bet you're overshooting the service, and maybe that can help you have the permission not to say yes to everything that comes your way.
I wonder, I would love to hear from both of you, what is a service obligation that you think is a valuable one to say yes to so that you can say no? Because one of the things that I've tried to say yes to is hiring committees, because I think that it's important to, hire good colleagues. But then there are other committees, and I don't want to just drag the library committee. I don't actually know who's on it at my university. So, but, I mean, that didn't seem like it seemed like, oh, a hiring committee. I always want to say yes to that because I want to help, bring in really excellent colleagues in equitable ways and things like that. Do you have recommendations for early career scholars on things that you think are wise yeses along the way?
My answer to that, which is not the answer, my answer to that is about the politics of the institution. That my preference is more akin to what Roger is talking about, that a junior scholar, regardless of what committees or what service opportunities are available and politically strategic, are not the priority. It's getting you through the process of promotion, through the process of tenure, doing those publications, teaching well those required classes. All the extra stuff is just that extra. For so many juniors, as well as people of color, the invisible service project are the students who seek you out. So you already have another dimension or another layer, because you've got students who think you're groovy, students that think you new, students that are glad you are a woman, students who are glad you're a person of color, where the older colleagues have already set boundaries and students are not seeking them out in the ways that they're seeking the junior person out or the person of color. So there are, for us, unwritten service projects that aren't in the manual that we do every day. Another example of the invisible service project is, oh, just preach in chapel. It's like, well, is that service? I can write that down, but oh, you're a good preacher. Just all you have to do is do it 2 or 3 times a semester. So that's not a committee. That takes time. It's not written down anywhere. Or if it is, it's just one line. Nobody really sees it. So there's a lot of trap doors and unwritten, unspoken things that can really zap your time if you don't use the magic word no.
Trapdoors is another magic word, because I look back that there are a lot of trapdoors, and that was my first instinct too. You have to think about the politicking of your institution and what it means to say yes and what it means to say no. And so even I think search committees are good, but they can be a trap because some search committees have zero efficacy on the actual decision, which sounds weird.
That's true.
And it takes a lot of time. And so that it just depends on the institution. It could be a very good thing, but it could also be a complete trapdoor.
When I think about permission to be a fully embodied version of myself as an academic, the first thing I think about is my own limited imagination when, as a child, when I thought about what a professor was. I knew one professor when I was a child, and he was tall and handsome and had many adventures. His name was Indiana Jones. that was the professor in my imagination, because I grew up in a rural working class community in Oregon, and no professors lived in my town that I knew of. And so Indiana Jones and all of his many adventures was sort of just the icon of professorship. And when I thought about my own life as a professor, I unconsciously, I think, compared myself to that model and never really felt like I could live up to that. Now, of course, there's a little bit of silliness to that because, he's a made up character, but he lives large in children of the 90s imaginations. But I've come to think in my professional life of all the reasons why I didn't feel that I belonged in the academy in relationship to that. There are so many different parts of his identity that I didn't experience. For one thing, it's maybe obvious, but there are some ways of being in the classroom and being a scholar that as a woman, I just was never going to be. I don't know that Indiana Jones bore children. I don't know that he had to manage, being an early career scholar and also taking time when your child is sick or something like that away from whatever committee meeting or meeting that you have to get to. And I had I was very self-conscious about the fact that those aspects of my identity did not fit the norm at my institution. Another factor in that's maybe not as obvious is that I grew up in a household that my entire childhood, we lived below the federal poverty line. And so I was just in a very working class / poor household. And there were certain parts of the academy that I didn't recognize until I was in graduate school that were outside of my experience, entirely outside of my experience. I remember the first time I went at Vanderbilt Divinity School, they had this really warm and welcoming cocktail party every fall at a professor's house. And that house that I went to, it was one of the fanciest houses I had ever been in. And I had never been to a cocktail party before. I was a server all through graduate school. And so I'd served at events, but I'd never been a guest at an event like that. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know how to behave. A friend of mine whose father was a professor at a major research university invited me to go with her. And so I remember just the whole time acting like she acted, trying to take on her affect. And so I was just really self-conscious. And that one cocktail party was one event, but throughout my graduate school and really early career, I was always sort of trying to translate the mannerisms and the way of seeing the world, even things like humor that I associated with my own upbringing. I recognized that those were different in the academy. And I've come to understand that the academy is just a really traditionally middle class / upper middle class profession. And there were certain parts of my identity that I just didn't understand. So I had to learn in a hurry. And the other factor, I mentioned it earlier, is that I started in the academy during the Great Recession. And so there was just constant anxiety, economic anxiety, that you don't really see when you imagine like the form of a professor, if that professor is Indiana Jones. And so one moment, I had a moment of real insecurity and crisis. And I was talking with a mentor in my life, and he was this old hippie pastor. And he told me, at some point in your life, Leah, you just have to do you. And I remember feeling like that is no use to me at all. I was just so frustrated. This world is not meant for me. I can't, what do you mean, you do you? But then I actually participated, the next year I participated in a Wabash workshop. And one of the questions, the guiding questions of our time together was, how do you maximize your embodied agency? How do you develop as a scholar? And so for about a week with a really diverse group of scholars, we all wrestled with that question. And that was a really pivotal turning point in my own academic career, because I realized that I was never going to be that form that was in my imagination. And I feel a little silly saying that it took that long for me as a full grown woman to like recognize that. But it kind of goes to how powerful those images really are. And that was okay. And that there were strategies that I could develop to not just survive, but to thrive in that context. And one of the moments that came to my mind while we were having that conversation was, as a graduate student, I didn't throw any cocktail parties, but I did start creating potlucks, grad school potlucks. At Vanderbilt, we had the what was basically like a utility closet. It had no windows, but it was the grad school lounge. We thought it was wonderful. It was one place where all the PhD students got to hang out. So I started organizing these potlucks, and students would come and we would bring whatever our favorite side dish was. And there was always somebody who would bring like a fifth as well. That was their contribution. I won't say who, but there were some really brilliant people there, and we all brought snacks and hung out together and laughed and really we behaved in ways that you would not see during a conference session. And that was a really life-giving experience for me. And it's kind of stood out in my mind as like a way to maximize my own embodied agency. I was raised as a Pentecostal pastor's daughter in a rural context in a poor household. And that, like, there are parts of me that that can thrive in the academy. It's not the cocktail party model. It's not Indiana Jones. It's the potluck. And that kind of collaborative model has sustained me as, a mom raising kids in the academy and trying to write. I've started to look for different models, not being like the lone guy out there, but being a collaborator, working with people. And that has been something that has allowed me to thrive. And I hope that it's a model that can be perpetuated in the academy so that there's a little bit more space for folks who may not conform to that Indiana Jones ideal.
So Leah, I think your storytelling and disclosure is very courageous, because there is so much anxiety and imposter syndrome in the classroom, in the academy, where people are trying to say who they are not. And you have just told us a little bit, given us a glimpse of your efforts at authenticity and freedom, right? In a space that would have you not be authentic and certainly not free. So thank you for that. So the issues of class in the academy are staggering, right? Are staggering. And we hear the phrase for our students, they're first generation college, right? We lose that storytelling amongst colleagues because everybody wants to be in a corduroy blazer with those patches on the elbows and smoking a pipe. And they're Indiana Jones's father, I think, right?
Yeah. Sean Connery.
They're Sean Connery. So if you're not able to pull off the Sean Connery look, then you're not helped to say, well, what does an authentic Leah Payne look like, smell like, walk like, talk like, be like? So we have to find our own ways and give ourselves our own permissions to be the potluck version and not the cocktail. And I think it's beautiful. Thank you. I think you've just given a gift. Thank you.
It's so wonderful because even as you dictated, this is almost like a movie when you were the server for these fancy professor cocktail parties, and now you're there with your gal pal who's showing you and trying to imitate. It's almost like a Reese Witherspoon film that you just pitched to us. But I'm especially struck by I have similar experiences of belonging and feeling foreign. And I'll be honest, Lynne, even my first Wabash experience, which was over 10 years ago, the very first reception, like, wait, we have dinner in 30 minutes. Why are you giving us all this food? Like, it was something that felt very foreign to me. It was so much abundance that I didn't think maybe I deserved, or like I just wasn't expecting. And I think that is a really hard turn for a lot of the Wabash community, especially in their early careers as they navigate that space. And also, just so you know, Leah, Indiana Jones would be kicked out of the academy for looting and smuggling artifacts. So just kind of keep that in mind. He's not the ideal today of what an
That's
archaeologist should be.
A white guy running around with a whip and a
Stealing
cowboy
things.
hat. Stealing things.
Isn't it weird how like there's certain narratives I'm like, yeah, that did not hold up over time. But I will say, if there's anybody who's participating in this via, streaming or podcasting, like if you're the person who's working at night, like I used to wait tables at night and then be in class during the day. And I remember being so tired, but I felt ashamed of it, to be honest. Like I felt like there was some part of me that hadn't really arrived if I wasn't funded. Now, as a regular scholar now, I realize, oh, well, there are other people whose parents were able to subsidize or in some other way they were able to subsidize their work. But now I've since, I'm out there with it. I grew up eating Cheetos. I still like them. But I think that there's something part of, like that. I hope that we can be a little less embarrassed by things that we should not be embarrassed by. But it is hard when I won't lie. I did go out and buy a jacket with pads because I just thought it looked cool because that was the only Sean Connery, right? He was in my imagination.
So I think for me, some of the class stuff played out when I realized that my salary was not sufficient to buy the houses that my colleagues could buy, either not on their salaries, but more on their white inheritance.
Right.
So we were in the same system, right? And I've got a similar job that they have. I did not sell the house to come there. I did not inherit the house to come there. I did not get the life insurance payout from my wealthy white parents to then do the house thing. So those kinds of class distinctions show up in a variety of ways that create obstacles that everybody does not have the same obstacles, but that are certainly class indicators that we have to be aware of and not shame ourselves, not blame ourselves, or wonder why we are not dealing as well with the situation as the colleagues seems like they are dealing with it when they don't have the same obstacles that we do.
And Lynn, I had like a lot of internalized guilt too, because I think about my parents who are immigrants and kind of their struggles, and there's just a lot of internalized guilt and questions of, do I deserve this? Like, what am I doing? And it's another layer on top of navigating permissions when you have it deep in your childhood that you never experienced this and your mom and dad never experienced this. So why should you get to experience this?
Go
ahead, Leah.
I was just thinking about my friend who was my ambassador into the academy, and she has no idea that she did that for me, but it was a real gift that she sort of helped me along the way. And so I think for those who are listening who that isn't their experience, you can do a lot to help your colleagues who are not who are feeling a little out of sorts.
So working with through Wabash Center with PhD students, not PhD students, with early career people in their first and second years of working in the academy. And we were getting at tell us stories about your highest anxieties, right? When have you felt the most anxious in your brand new job? The story of just what you said, Leah, went to the trustee dinner, didn't know what knife or spoon to use, went to the president's house and didn't know the protocols of a cocktail party, went to the fancy shindig fundraiser, something to represent the school because they trotted me out because I was a newly hired faculty person, and felt like a fish out of water, right? So this class thing and these protocols and the issues of etiquette that we don't use as a society too much, but that the academy is still immersed in, right? Trips a whole bunch of people up. And where do you learn this stuff other than in the moment, right? Just trying to get it right in the moment.
One of the first, moments where someone helped me out. I'm gonna name names, Roger Nam, because I remember we were both at the same fancy academic dinner. You might not even remember this, and people were doing like fancy wine tasting, and it was very. And then one of the dinner attendees, who does not fit any of our profiles, demographically speaking, said, what's the litmus test of a film that you need to, like, if you want to judge if someone is really like an intellectual or something? And people were saying all kinds of great art house films. I have nothing against art house films, but then it came to me and I said the first thing that came to my head was like, I've always really liked Rocky. And it's actually a lot about class and race and, anyway. And I remember then all of a sudden that was not the right answer. And Roger Nam was sitting across the table from me and he said, I love Rocky too. And you bailed me out so much. I
remember this. But I do love Rocky.
Right. Yeah. But I remember thinking, oh, that was not the right thing to say. And thank you for bailing me out.
So how long did it take the two of you to make the move into comfort? Or have you made the move? Let me not assume that the move has been made.
Yeah, I feel comfortable. And I think part of it for me is I've always underestimated the effect of my embodiment when I'm placed in a situation. So I've been so many firsts in so many times, not by design. And as you know, I'm not that old. I'm not so hardy, right? I'm not that old, but I just happen to be a first in a lot of spaces. And I think I want to be an example that you don't have to be old school wealth to belong in these spaces. In fact, what you bring is going to make it better. And so to come with and I think realizing, internalizing that helped me accept this is who I am, this is what I'm going to be, and I'm going to model this for the people behind me. And I think that intentional thought helped me feel more comfortable in all sorts of settings of being a professor outside writing expository prose I wasn't trained for during grad school. But what about Leah, actually? Because you look like, as I was watching you, yeah, she's made that transition from that first meet. Like what happened to make that transition for you?
It's funny. I think of it in a kind of a bittersweet way. I don't know if either of you feel that way, because I think that learning to become comfortable and like fluent in the language of the academy comes at a cost in some ways, because I do sometimes feel distant from some of the people that I was raised with, and I never want that to be the case. And so I think there's always a little bit of a bittersweet part of it. I think sometimes it doesn't take very long to get back into like whatever the language of your childhood is, if you try. But I think in terms of just developing comfort, I've learned a lot. I think I'm the most comfortable when I'm working in cooperation with other people. So I tend to think like, who else is feeling a little bit left out? Let's band together and let's create a life-giving space with all of us. And I think that's when I feel the most comfortable. And because I recognize I come into spaces with my own set of privileges. And so I try to, I think I feel the best about it. And I feel like, okay, I like the academy. This is working when it's more of a space of not necessarily individual achievement, but cooperation and collaboration. And that makes, Roger, what you said is really true. You have been the first. And in the spaces where I'm the first, I try to remember that that there's value in it. And even if I make a mistake, it's going to be good for somebody else to see in one way or another. So, but I'd love to hear from you, Lynne. How do you, I'd love to hear yours.
Unlike the two of you, I'm old, right? I've been at this game a long time. But my comfort came with the womanist group at AAR. Mm-hmm. So I did feel like I was flailing just because the academy was such a foreign space, right? But there were people who were there that looked like me, walked like, but it still felt foreign to me. And when I went to AAR and found the womanist group, African American women who have a particular approach and theology and perspectives, I found my group, my academic tribe. And so when those colleagues and sisters like Katie Cannon and Dolores Williams and Marcia Riggs and Sharon Fluker literally kind of scooped me up and said, "You are one of us," that was life-giving for me. And I don't think I've turned around since. I do think I've worked hard at feeling comfortable in my own skin in the classroom and at the faculty meeting, realizing that so much of the academy is hostile to Black women, right? It's not, there are times when I have not felt uncomfortable, I have felt attacked. And the strange part about the attack, it wasn't personal. The academy doesn't like Black women. It doesn't like Black bodies. It doesn't, right? So that hostility, the womanist community helped me understand how to navigate that hostility. The other thing, which was a similar thing, was I participated at Wabash Center, the first African American early career workshop. And when we, the 14 of us, got in the men and women got in the room together, it was like a family reunion. I'm back to the metaphor of family, right? But it's not imposed, it's one I want to use, right? We were so glad to be together because all of us felt alone wherever we were. So then we were able to establish a national network, not just looking for a network in our particular location or friends in our own circles that were beyond the academy, but then realizing that the networks had to be across schools, not just in just your own school, and worked on projects together from the networks that came out of that workshop. With other African-American scholars, wrote together, traveled together, goofed off together, had great fun together. And it was the fun part that probably saved my life the most, that we just laughed together. And I remember one of the important things was I had a pact with a friend, and the pact was something like this: if you hear that I am walking around campus and my lipstick is up, under my nose and on my cheeks, my wig is sideways, and I only have on one shoe, don't gossip about me, come get me. Now, when you get there, I will resist you. I will not go along well. You might have to tackle me and drag me off. But please do that. And we agreed. So you hear the humor in it, but we were serious. Being in the academy is a death-dealing, sanity, flexible place. And you need to know that people have your back, right? You need to know that people will come to your aid. We are people who are trained in peculiar ways, doing peculiar things with this life of the mind, with these ideas, with these larger callings. And unless you have a network of other human beings, it's tough going.
Network of other human beings. That's the core of what brought me to Permissions too. It was a network of other human beings.
It's funny because I was reflecting on the Wabash cohort that I participated in, and at the beginning of our time together, one of our mentors said, "You've got people, these are your people." And throughout, it's been several years now, some among us, we've had parents die, we've had jobs transitioning, children born, and we all keep in touch in a way that it's just life-giving, and it does give you permission to keep going and to keep trying. And I think what you said, Lynne, is so helpful, just to have fun, to laugh. And I don't think that some of the hardships that my cohort has endured would be bearable without that.
Roger and Leah. This is the first of 3 conversations, so I'm very excited about the next 2 conversations. Thank you so much for your insights and for your care. I think these are conversations that our colleagues need, and also there aren't many spaces or people courageous enough to be so open and so honest about the kinds of things that we really grapple with in our enterprise. So thank you.
Thank you for hosting and facilitating this conversation, Lynn.
What a gift. Thank you.
To our viewers and our listeners, all the resources produced by Wabash Center can be found on our website. Also, look to our website for information on workshops, salons, and grants. Many thanks to my team, Carly and Paul, who make all the digital resources possible. And a special thanks always to Paul Myrie for his direction, for his sound engineering, and for his music. And we are out.